Hey, this is Jason with MyRepairApp, and today we're going to go over your metrics and what they mean. So first things first is we're going to click on metrics. The very first page is going to be your overview, which is this one. And if you need to filter the data, all you do is press your filter button. You can filter by a certain amount of time. This location only has 2 days, so like yesterday and today, because it's all we've done. So I'm going to click on that. That'll show the last 2 days, which will be that. And then if I click here, that'll just show like today. You'll see everything's going to change dynamically. And then I will go back into here. So you'll see here, the days have changed for what it's doing. And then that's how you filter for like data if you want to see over a certain amount of time. Your gross profit margin should go without saying. Gross profit margin is going to tell you how much money you are profiting, which is pretty much just going to be your sales minus like parts. So 90% is pretty much impossible. But a good rule of thumb is you want to be in the, if you're just doing like walk-in repair, you want to be like 65% or higher. If you're like 60% and like lower, I can almost guarantee you that you're either like getting really, really close to just like break even. You might be a little bit better than break even, or you're doing a little bit worse. Just over the hundreds of locations we looked at, that's pretty much a very common thing we see, like without exception. Revenue per man hour. This is my favorite metric. This is going to essentially take the amount of hours that your employee has worked, or like employees have worked, and it's going to divide it by the amount of revenue. And it's going to show you exactly how much revenue is being generated per hour that someone works, right? So if you have one employee and they worked 5 hours, you did $500 in sales, it's going to say revenue per man hour is going to be $100, right? So this one is very similar to some of the other metrics on this page. It's going to be a really good indicator of if you're being really good with your labor and your sales in comparison. So a good rule of thumb is if you're in the 60 to 70s, you're probably right at that, like really close to break even or a little bit closer. Stores that are doing like really, really well, we usually see in the 130 ranges. So for every employee hour that's being worked, they're generating $130. So if your employee is, let's say your employee is getting paid $20 an hour, they're generating for every hour being worked $130, and your profit margin is, let's say, we'll say 50% because I just don't feel like doing that off the top of my head. So 50% of that is going to be like $65. So they're generating $65. So that's essentially $45 in profit every single hour. You know, so is that sustainable? Is going to depend on like obviously your rent and things like that. But that's how you're going to want to use that. Like if you're trying to like reverse engineer it. But you know, just rule of thumb, if you're 100 or higher, you're doing great. If you're like lower than that, you could probably charge more, just because we see stores that are doing really, really well in that range. But the number one indicator for that is like your Google ranking. If you're ranked really low on Google, you usually can't afford to, you know, charge, you know, premium prices, because you're either just not doing that well, or you just don't have the level of reviews, right? Because reviews are going to be a big trust factor. It's going to tell your customer how well they can trust you because other people have rated you really high. So first things first is if you're struggling and your reviews aren't where they need to be at, work on that. Like all of your effort should be into that. Cool. Anyway, so units per transaction. This one is also pretty important. So this is going to tell you how many things are being put on a ticket, right? So as an example, this location puts on about 1.25 items per ticket. It's going to essentially tell you, is your staff upselling, right? So if you're just at one, it means people are essentially just putting one thing on a ticket and that's it. It means there's no upselling being done. You can't sustain a business if you're not upselling other products. So if you're 2 or higher, I can almost guarantee you that store's probably at least doing $40,000 a month, like just off the riff, because that's what we see. So if you're doing employee commissions, things like that, you should probably add this in there and say like, make sure that this is at like a 2 or above, right? And you're going to see your numbers kind of explode. This one's real good to use as well. Average transaction value, that's just all of your tickets divided by the number of tickets, and it's going to tell you the average that you guys are charging for that ticket. This one is going to depend on like if you're really device heavy, walk-in heavy, things like that. You just want to use the past data that you're using to see like, you know, are your prices going up? Are they going down? Things like that. If they're going down, not a great sign. If they're going up, it's probably a really good sign. If your average transaction value is in the 130s, like that's pretty decent. If it's lower than that, that's like really, really bad. Just as a rule of thumb. Obviously, everybody's business is different. If you have enough data, look at all the data over time. But that's how you want to look at these four, right? It's the easiest way to gauge like health of the business. Top 10 sales, pretty self-explanatory. Top 10 repairs, also self-explanatory. Customer referrals, this is going to be if you go into, let's say, check-in, sale. If I was to do a new customer, how'd you hear about us? Like this, from Facebook. Cool. So if you're like really big into Facebook ads as an example, but Facebook is making up a very small percentage of this, but you're spending all your ad money on Facebook, it means you're not getting a return, which means you need to lower the amount of money you're spending on Facebook. How you want to use that. You can do the same with like Google, things like that, but that's how you want to use that. It's going to be a really good indicator of like your marketing spend. A lot of people do like carrier runs on this as well. Like, oh, Verizon told us about you. All right. And then Verizon's going to make up a certain section of that. Cool. Then we're going to click on tickets. It's going to go to another section. This one is a little bit more self-explanatory. So it's just how many new customers have you had in that time period? How many are returning? If you're at 0, that is not a good sign. Repeat customers, 0%, just a percentage. The average ticket amount is going to be essentially the same thing as what we saw before. Total tickets is going to be the amount of tickets that have just been generated in total. Repair, how many of those were repair, sales, and then customer value. So if you look over here, it's a repair and a sale, right? It's just going to track those two. That's what a repair ticket and a sale ticket is. Customer value, this one is probably the most important if you're looking at like a metric. So customer value is going to tell you how much that customer is worth to your source, how much they're spending every visit on average. So you usually want to do this with marketing. So if you're sitting there and you're spending, let's say $50 to get a single customer in on a marketing campaign, but your customer value is $120 and your profit margin is 60, means you're only making $60. So off that one customer, you're making $60, but you're spending $50 to get them. Doesn't make much sense, right? So that's how you want to use that number. Those numbers shouldn't be like that high, that your spend shouldn't be like, if you're looking at like the cost of acquisition for a customer, it should be in this industry, I'd say even like 10 to 15 is like pretty high, but that's probably what you're going to see on like a Facebook or a Google, but it depends, right? Depends on your area, things like that. And it might've changed since I was like deep in the weeds, but we're going to go into sales. This is going to go over sales, right? So your sales revenue, how much you guys have done in sales, what your profit margin on sales are. And the things that make up sales is accessories, devices, parts, prepaid, right? All these go into making up this sales revenue number. Your profit margin for like sales, that's going to matter a lot. If you're doing a lot of devices, it's obviously going to be lower than this. But depending on your store, and if you're really heavy on walk-in, it means you're going to do a lot of accessories, which means your profit margin should be like pretty high. If you're doing a lot of devices, it's going to be a little bit lower, but you want to use this to track it over like 6 months of data. And you want to sit there and say, all right, so what's a good profit margin I should be charging for those devices on average? And then you want to start like ticking those numbers up. Sales per employee, that's going to be how many sales that employee is generating, right? So if you just sit there and you have people who aren't doing a whole bunch of sales, but they're just doing a whole bunch of repairs, but you're wanting them to upsell, this will be like a good thing for that. Pretty straightforward. Repairs, the repair profit margin, if you're really heavy on just walk-in repair, this should be pretty high. Should be probably in like the 70, 80s. If it's lower than that and you're just walk-in repair, like just people walking in and dropping stuff off, take a look at it. Repair revenue, that's going to be how much revenue has been generated from the repair, warranty rate, pretty self-explanatory. Average repair time, the way that that's going to be tracked is if you go onto your ticket board, the amount of time that something's going to stay in repair and then goes to closed, that's going to track every single minute that's going to be from there. And the way you want to use that is, let's say that you have, that's more on the employee side, but if you have an employee that's essentially below the average in your store, then you probably want to train them up a little bit. Over here, it's going to say phone repairs. How many of these repairs were phones? So how is the system tracking this? If you go to your inventory, go to your services, and if you see over here, repair, phone. So that's for a phone. If you see it and it says repair computer, it's going to be a computer repair, right? Repair game, it's going to be a game repair. Repair tablet, it's going to be a tablet repair. And if it's repair other, it's going to be the other. So that's how it's going to track. It's through the types. And so that's why when you do the names, you also want to make sure your types are set properly. The reason this is important, if you're sitting there and you're doing $15,000 a month in phone repair, but you look in your inventory and you only have, and you have 40,000 in phone repair parts, right? Obviously that's way too much stock. You need to kind of change, but you essentially want to use this to figure out how much you're generating from there and to make sure you're carrying the appropriate amount of parts. And you want to do that as a percentage, because if you do it as a percentage, you can essentially just copy and paste that to another location, because 2 locations are not going to do the same amount of numbers, especially a newer location. But all of this is to essentially try and build you a scalable system. So if you're sitting there and you're saying we're doing 15,000 in phone repair, it means we shouldn't be carrying any more than $2,000 in phone parts at one time, right? Just as an example, for that, you probably want to be in the 3 to 4s, but play with that number. It's going to be different depending on your business model, but that ties more into inventory. So inventory in stock, this is going to tell you exactly how much in stock inventory you have. So if you go into your inventory, you go to your parts, you'll see that we have one that's in stock for $48.76. So $48.76, phone part, right? Part, phone. Makes sense. If I sat there and I had it as part tablet, it'll go into tablets. Inventory RMA, that's just how many things you've RMA'd. Ordered inventory, that's going to be essentially how many purchase orders you have open, and so how much inventory is open, still in ordering status. Aging inventory, this is probably the most important thing on here. Oh, you can also click and get exactly that information, by the way, which is probably easier than me going here, but I just wanted to show you. So you can click these. Aging inventory. So if you've operated a location or the business for a very long time, you understand you just kind of get stuck with parts, and then finding out how long you've had a part is kind of a pain. So from here, you can actually put forward a process that's hey, if I've had this part for more than 2 or 3 months, I want you guys to clearance it out, right? Somebody calls and they're hey, I have this repair. Instead of being stuck with that part, maybe you just put it down. Maybe you sell it on eBay, do something like that, but try and get that money back so that you can do something else with it. Because if it's been stuck with you that long, the odds that it's going to be stuck with you in 6 months to a year to 2 years to just never being able to be sold is high. And if you've ran a store for a really long time, you understand that's always the case, right? It just sticks with you for forever. And that's just becoming more affluent in business and being more optimal with how you're using your cash on hand. But you should always have a process in place to get rid of old inventory. And then this is just the easiest way to do it, because we're trying to design everything to where an employee can do it. Because if you're having to sit there and manage every little piece of the business and it takes you forever to find data, you're never going to be able to get out of your store. It's going to be impossible. So that's why we're trying to make things just as easy as possible. So as an example, if you're an absentee owner like me, and I sit there and I look at my inventory and I'm all right, so I'm doing 20,000 in sales, but I have, $6,000 in inventory, and I replenish inventory every single week. I know that with the inventory I have on hand, I have too much, right? So you either start scaling down, you talk to the manager, tell them to not carry as much, or maybe that's exactly where you want to be at, but you essentially want to say like, hey, I don't want more than 20% of revenue in my store of inventory at a time, right? Because if you want to open another location, you can sit there and say that because you're like, all right, I'm going to start. I think we're going to do 15,000 the first month, which means I need to have 3,000 in inventory as an example. As a real loose example, play with the number that fits how your business model works. But it sounds simple, right? Business models shouldn't be difficult. Like if they're too difficult to understand, then like nobody else is going to be able to follow them. Cool. Let's go to the employee tab. So over here is going to essentially tell you if you have like multiple employees, it'll show all the employees, but what this employee has produced for you, right? So how many sales they've done, how many repairs that they've done, warranty rates, accessory attachment rates. Accessory attachment is probably the most slept on thing in the independent industry, I would say. If you are less than 30%, you are just like, you're just not asking, like you're just not trying at all. From what we've seen in the tests that we've done, if you're sitting there and you're asking every single employee, you should be 40, 50%. Like just easy, right? Because somebody broke their phone. They need a tempered glass. They want to put it on now, right? It's simple. But even so, you know, some people say, oh, but they're going to say no. Like, yeah, even if you're at a 30% attachment rate, that's like not bad. But that's 2 out of 3 people say no. Like you just have to get used to being told no. That's a whole different thing. But for context, if you're in like the wireless industry and you're below like 80%, you're underperforming. So for us to be in the 30% and just say like we're doing really, really well is not great, right? It means you need to pick that number up. Stores that I see that like do extremely well, their accessory attachment rates are usually in the 40, 50%. And that's just a standard that that owner has most of the time. So they'll say like, you know, a lot of your incentives, commission structures is going to be related to, hey, if your accessory attachment rate is below, 40%, then you only make like half of what it should be, right? But if that increases, that generates you an extra like $1,000, but it costs you like 500. That's a good trade, right? Because you made an additional $500 and you didn't really do anything. But that's how you kind of needed to think about things. Anyway, so that's like a general overview of metrics. I'll probably do a more in-depth one later that's more specific towards like locations that have actual data. But yeah, if you have any questions, definitely reach out to us at support@myrepairapp.com on the Facebook group or on our Discord. Thanks. Bye.